This is Barbara Loden. She deserves endless amounts of acclaim and a reputation as one of the pioneers of the New Hollywood movement, which went down in history as arguably the most important and stacked period in American filmmaking. But you'd be forgiven for not knowing her name, and you'd be forgiven for not recognizing her either. Loden was an actor, a producer, a writer, and a director, but her filmography was cut tragically short in all regards. The film craft she explored the most was acting, with 10 credits amassed on IMDb as opposed to the 2 or 3 credits at most in the other categories. But if you look past the tiny TV appearances, bit parts, and short films, you're again down to just 3 major credits. Those first 2 were both directed by Elia Kazan, whom Loden subsequently married and had children with during that long stretch of relative inactivity on the screen. The latter, Wanda, was written and directed by Loden herself. Loden also did her share of acting on the stage and even earned a Tony Award for her work. But of course, as is the nature of live theater, those performances are largely lost to time, with the exception of some semi-rare recordings, such as her supporting role in The Glass Menagerie, which was archived as part of the CBS Playhouse broadcast back in the mid-60s. Though her couple of film performances might not have turned her into a big star, it was immediately clear that she had something special. Her role in Splendor in the Grass is a relatively small one, but she's far and above the best part of that entire film. Even though she's relegated to playing at best third fiddle, if not fourth or fifth fiddle, to triple Oscar nominee Natalie Wood and Oscar winner Warren Beatty, Loden handily outshined both of them. She leaves an impression in Wild River as well, but the role is quite minor, and she doesn't have much to work with. Her screen time is rather minimal. She's also known to have shot a key scene for 1968's The Swimmer, but she was replaced during reshoots, and there's no surviving footage of her work on the film, only a couple of still photographs of her on set. That leaves Wanda as her only starring feature film role.
Mrs. Goronsky, your husband told me you deserted him and the children. What do you have to say?
Nothing.
Did you desert them?
Listen, Judge, if he wants a divorce, just give it to him.
Now, Mrs. Goronsky, you have 2 young children here.
They'd be better off with him.
What?
They'd be better off with him.
You have no objections to this divorce?
No, I don't have any objection to it.
The loose narrative follows the titular Wanda as she leaves behind her husband and children to wander through rust-belt coal country. Unfulfilled with a domesticated life, Wanda searches more or less aimlessly for something or someone to fill the hole she feels inside. But all she finds are people who take advantage of her in one way or another. She eventually gets brought into a bank robbery plot, but make no mistake, Wanda is not a film that has any interest in action or excitement. It's too down-tempo for that. It's too real for that. And its priorities are elsewhere.
I read a story in the newspaper many years ago about a woman who had been an accomplice in a crime, and even though she hadn't really done anything, she was along with the man who robbed a bank, and she hadn't really hurt anyone or done anything. And when she was on trial, the judge sentenced her to 20 years in prison with no appeal. And when he sentenced her, she thanked him. And I started wondering, why would she thank him? Why would she be glad to be put in an institution, into a prison? I had this newspaper article for many years, and then I thought about writing a script on it. At that time, I was not even interested in making a film. I just thought I would write a script about it and try to get it done. I would not take it to studios because I didn't really want to work for a movie studio making that kind of film. I wanted to make it in my own way and not have all that kind of pressure.
Loden's directing style was heavily improvisational, giving herself and her small cast of actors the freedom to explore their characters and feel their way through scenes without sticking to the script that she wrote out beforehand, treating it more like a rough list of plot beats to hit from a bird's eye view. Loden spent an entire year shooting Wanda because, in her words, she didn't want it to end.
Well, it took me a year to make it, but only because I took my time. I was afraid to finish it.
That is the one thing, the commitment when you do make a movie.
And I didn't have a deadline. See, I had no pressure, so I was really sort of afraid.
Afraid to finish it?
Yeah.
What was the
Because I never have finished anything in my life, so it was a scary thing.
And the rough cut of the film was around 4 hours long as a result of this exploratory improvisation, protracted production, and loose grip on the narrative. And even though the film was eventually painstakingly whittled down to just 1 hour and 42 minutes, this methodology remains apparent in the pace and flow of scenes, which can be long, slow, and frankly a bit challenging at times as the actors ramble their way through wandering scenes. But that aimless feeling in the film's more challenging scenes is reflective of the inner aimlessness of Wanda herself, and it ends up working in service of the film's dense but rich thematic exploration. That improvisational style also leads to an unparalleled sense of realism, with incredibly naturalistic performances. That, coupled with the film's extremely low budget and rough around the edges visual presentation, give the film a pseudo-documentary feel at times. The film's cinematographer had never shot a narrative film before, and he worked closely with Loden to figure out shots on the fly and make do primarily with just natural light. The occasionally awkward framing, ugly lighting, and overexposed shots only compound the sense of realism as they give the whole project a documentary vibe and make the characters feel as authentic and in the moment as could be. The slight roughness of the film craft adds texture rather than taking anything away from the experience, and its low-key approach to characters and dialogue almost feels like the burgeoning new Hollywood movement that Wanda so perfectly epitomizes was fused with the mumblecore genre that wouldn't take root until decades later. Wanda was ahead of its time in too many ways to count, which was ultimately to its detriment. Not least of all because it was a feature film written and directed by a woman and telling a narrative that had no qualms whatsoever with potentially alienating male audiences, which it certainly did and was already doing back when it was just a script that Loden was attempting to get financed. She only directed it herself because none of the male directors understood the material.
I sent it to some directors who liked it, but when I talked to them, I didn't think they really understood what it was really about. They were all men, which wouldn't necessarily make a difference, but they didn't seem to understand what this woman was about.
In the early days of the film industry, there were a great many women who held above-the-line positions, but that changed over time. While Barbara Loden wasn't quite a lone operator as a solo woman writer-director in 1970, the new Hollywood era was certainly a male-dominated movement. Give Wanda a 5-year spread in either direction, and you won't likely find many feature films made by other women. Even a contemporary huge name like Kathryn Bigelow still had a male co-director to get her first feature film off the ground over a decade later. The great Elaine May is Loden's closest contemporary, but even she didn't get the chance to direct her first film until the year after Wanda, despite achieving a much higher level of fame as a performer than Loden ever did all the way back in the 50s, and being part of a double act with Mike Nichols, who quite literally kickstarted the new Hollywood movement with The Graduate in 1967, which was half of the 1-2 punch that defined the next decade and changing times of American filmmaking. And in fact, Wanda bears an even more direct parallel to the other half of that 1-2 punch, 1967's Bonnie and Clyde. Both films are about a man and woman tangled in an unconventional romance and robbing banks together. But while Bonnie and Clyde utilizes a period setting, historical figures, and romanticizes their actions, Wanda is modern, stripped back to pseudo-documentary levels of simplicity, and inverts practically everything about the former film's presentation. As Amy Tobin wrote in her essay Wanda, a Miracle for the Criterion Current, quote, Wanda can be read as a corrective to the glamour and romanticism of Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde. Going on to add, quote, It's also obvious that her ambition to make Wanda into a more honest version of a crime movie was complex in its motivations, among them her need to represent her own story and the story of kindred women, more truthfully than it ever could be represented in star-driven Hollywood. Wanda was made exclusively with non-actors outside of Loden herself. Wanda isn't the easiest watch at times, but it soars on the strength of its performances, themes, and just how different it is in its place in time. It's one of these semi-unsung, groundbreaking films that paved the way for so many of the titans that would follow in the new Hollywood era. If I were to compare Loden's filmmaking style to anyone's, it would have to be John Cassavetes. Wanda feels like it offers a distinct, even lower-budgeted counterpoint to his rambling, exploratory storytelling style, complex characters, and commitment to performances and authenticity above plot or entertainment. If you aren't already familiar with John Cassavetes' work, refer to my video essay that covers his entire career. Wanda was an obvious passion project for Loden. It's hard for a writer-director star to not be heavily personally invested in whatever story it is that they're telling, but Loden had even more of a connection to the story than most. It was a deeply personal film in multiple ways.
And you said somewhere that it was about your life in an interview that I read. You never did actually that, did you? Well, if you did, you don't have to talk about it, but I'd like it if you did.
Well, no, what I meant was that the character in the movie, is very much the way that I used to be, in the sense of she just sort of floats around and doesn't really know what to do with herself. And until somebody else tells her what to do, and depends on what person you get hooked up with that tells you what to do as to what the results will be. And she gets hooked up with the wrong person.
The most direct look at Loden herself can be found in the hour-long documentary I Am Wanda, where even though Loden is out of character, clear connective tissue persists between the real her and the character she played in her lone feature film. The documentary was made just 3 months prior to Loden's death, which she knew was imminent, but kept secret from the documentarians at the time.
I didn't get along with my mother, and so for many years it was rather touch and go. I didn't keep in contact with her, and we didn't get along at all for a lot of times. But a few years ago, my mother got very sick, and she had no one, and so I took care of her, and I spent a lot of time with her, and we talked a lot, and we became very close. This was 2 years before she died.
So much of what she says about her mother mirrors her own life and her own situation at the time. Both married young and had multiple children, each marriage being far from ideal, and both dying a drawn-out death that had them reckoning with heavy self-reflection and contemplation.
She said, I don't know what I would have done without you, and just think that I tried to get rid of you. And she told me that when she was first pregnant with me, that she had tried to abort me. But I didn't, but then she said that she was glad she didn't. But I didn't feel bad about it. I didn't resent her for that, because I understood what she was going through at that time. She got married when she was very young, and she had 2 children before me, and it really was not a good time to have another baby. This was during the Depression, and she and my father weren't getting along. So I could understand why that had happened. I think about her a lot, and I find myself being like my mother, even looking like her more and more as I get older. And I feel very close to her.
Loden's short body of work is certainly not for lack of trying, but there's also another insight to be gleaned from this doc on why she wasn't in more films.
It's hard to determine whether one is a good mother or not, but I do know that when my children were very young, right after they were born, I was working a lot, and I did feel very guilty at that time, and I felt very torn between my work and not being able to be with my children enough. And I still feel very bad about that. I used to think at one time that I had had a very sad childhood, but now looking back, I'm really glad, because it's what makes me what I am, and I accept what I am.
These days, Wanda gets its share of passionate, though still extremely limited, support and acclaim, helped in no small part by its induction into the Criterion Collection. But for a long, long time, it was considered a failure and languished in obscurity for decades. Aside from picking up the Best Foreign Film Prize at the prestigious Venice Film Festival, where it had its premiere, Wanda was largely forgotten about as soon as it came out, though a small reputation as a rare indie gem persisted in certain cinematic circles. As a matter of fact, so forgotten was the film that the aforementioned Criterion Collection remaster nearly wasn't possible at all, and was the result of some extraordinary luck and timing. Film restoration expert Ross Lipman quite literally stumbled upon the original film reels for Wanda while sifting through piles and piles of old film equipment and negatives that were about to be trucked off to the dump when a film lab was shutting down and throwing out everything left unclaimed. If Lipman hadn't been in the right place at the right time, Wanda would be significantly harder to see at all and impossible to view in this quality. And although this restoration and later reappraisement has put a great many eyes on it to finally appreciate it, Wanda's renaissance sadly came long after Loden's death. She never got to see her passion project reevaluated for the groundbreaking achievement that it was. Loden died of breast cancer at just 48 years old in 1980. Loden directed 2 short films after Wanda, neither of which she wrote, and both of which were made for the Learning Corporation of America. They're the kind of thing meant to be shown in a classroom for young kids. The Frontier Experience is a simple history lesson, and The Boy Who Liked Deer is essentially an anti-vandalism PSA. Loden does what she can within the tight confines of those briefings and tries to elevate the proceedings, but these were not passion projects like Wanda. However, it's possible that she might have seen them as stepping stones toward another passion project on the horizon. She had an unknown number of additional screenplays written and ready to be shot, but she lacked the good health and the means necessary to make them after the failure of Wanda. It seems like her acclaimed Oscar-winning husband could have helped get those projects off the ground if he really wanted to, but they were approaching a divorce around the time of her death, and there seemed to be a not insignificant amount of jealousy from Kazan, who described her as extremely talented, but said he mostly left her to her own devices with her filmmaking endeavors. But then at other points, Kazan tried to take some amount of credit for Wanda, even occasionally claiming to have written the first draft of Loden's script, which we only have his word for, and personally I don't buy it. There's a great piece in My Feminism about Kazan's consistent efforts to undermine his wife's talents and accomplishments, titled Barbara Loden's Recovered Voice, From Wanda's Mutism to Pensiveness, if you want to learn more about that side of things. And it's also suspected that Kazan was the one responsible for getting her scene in The Swimmer cut and recast with somebody else, though he of course denied that.
And I feel this is one thing I was talking about before, about continuity, that life goes on and that people's lives are not in vain, because I think through what I do, I might be able to help to express some of the things that my mother wasn't able to express in her lifetime. And some of the things that she went through, I can help through my own being, to continue my mother's. I don't consciously do that, but it's just a natural thing that happens. That I really understand her life. I mean, as much as I can, and it's part of me, and everything is part of me. It's what I'm trying to. I hope I will be able, here and there, to express in my work. Not everything at once, but a little aspect of it here, a little aspect of it there. And this is why I want to do what I do. It's very important to me that I get a lot of these things out through my work. Just as my contribution to life and to all the people.
It was abundantly clear that Loden had much more to say, and maybe the world just wasn't ready to hear it.
Paul Mann wrote to us afterwards. Barbara and I had a very long talk. She seemed to want particularly to review the 28 years of her life since we met. My life was hard, too much of the time, too hard. One shouldn't have to work so hard against so many obstacles in order to succeed, even a little. So much I didn't get done that I wanted to do. I wanted to direct films, plays. We couldn't finish our work on the O'Neills play. I had no energy. And there's so much I didn't achieve, but I tried to be independent and to create my own way. Otherwise, I would have become like a Wanda, all my life just floating around. I've made my peace. I'm not afraid of death. If I have to, I'm ready to die. I can go.